Borja Doumoué Saleh is an ancient city situated right across the Beau Regreg River from Rabat, the capital of Morocco. While it is not very popular a city among visitors, it does have some undeniable historic attractions. Take a stroll along the Atlantic coastline and the city walls surrounding Saleh, passing by the bustling Medina, and in the end, you might find yourself standing before an old cannon and the entrance to a forgotten fortress that still remembers the very origin of these walls. In the 13th century, a fleet of Spaniards, possibly Castilians, came from across the ocean and raided the city, killing many and capturing more than 3,000 inhabitants to sell them off to civilian slavers. The Sultan, Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Abd al-Haqq, took back the city after a fortnight's siege, and soon started to build a fortress and city walls for civil defense. This stronghold was called Borja Doumoué, Borj ad-Dumu, meaning Bastion of Tears, after the dreadful events that took place on the site. It was entrusted to Marabout Sidi ben Achir, one of the major Islamic saints of Saleh, whose mausoleum is located right in front of it. In 1785, the Alawite Sultan Sidi Muhammad ben Abdallah re-equipped the fortress with a prison and bronze cannons, which are still there in their rusty, dilapidated state, silently watching the waves below. The site is about a half-hour's walk from the Salehville station. The fortress is also known as Bastion des Larmes, Borj Sidi Benakir, and the Old Squala, Scala la Kdima. Almoravid Quba. The Almoravids were a Berber dynasty that could be described as a cross between Islamic monks and soldiers, who founded the city of Marrakesh in the 11th century. From their capital in the city, the empire managed to extend its dominion over all of Morocco, and conquered a large part of the Iberian Peninsula. Marrakesh became a great walled capital with lush gardens and magnificent palaces and mosques, of which today, unfortunately, nothing remains. Nothing, except the Quba. The Almoravid Quba, or Quba Baadian, was built in 1117. This small building was once part of a lost Almoravid mosque, where it was used for ablutions before prayer. The Quba had a system of toilets, showers, and taps. Its water was extracted from underground aquifers and transported by bronze pipes. Today the importance of this building is not only historical, its style also had a huge influence on Moroccan architecture. Of particular importance is the abundance of decorative elements of the dome, such as palms, pine cones, and tree leaves. In the years to come, these would be used in mosques and buildings throughout the city. Pay close attention to the shapes of the windows, they would later become almost a symbol of the Almohades and the Benemarian dynasty. Also, of note is the curious calligraphy covering the Quba Foundation, which includes the oldest cursive inscription in Maghrebi script found in North Africa. Bahia Palace. Built by Grand Viziers to be the greatest palace of its time, Bahia Palace was later looted by the Sultan and then occupied by the French. The vast palace still sometimes hosts the Moroccan royal family, but is more typically frequented by tourists who come to marvel at the fine architecture and intricate decorations. Bahia Palace was built in the 1860s by Moussa, the powerful Grand Vizier of Sultan Hassan I of Morocco. His intention was to build the greatest palace of its time, a lofty goal that only began to come close to fruition when his son took control of the palace in 1894. Moussa's son, Ahmed ben Moussa, also known as Ba Ahmed, was even more powerful than his father, serving as Grand Vizier and as regent of Morocco during the reign of the child Sultan Abd al-Aziz. He expanded upon the existing palace, bringing in the renowned architect Muhammad al-Makki and some of the finest craftsmen in the country to create the palace we see today. He also built rooms to house his 4 wives and 24 concubines. Ahmed ben Moussa died in 1900 and the palace was looted en masse. His concubines swiftly took their share before Sultan Abd al-Aziz, the former child sultan, arrived, carting off as much as possible to his own palace. By looting standards, it was all fairly civilized, and the palace itself was undamaged. Soon after, Bahia Palace was occupied by Thami el-Glaoui, a warlord who served as the Pasha of Marrakesh from 1912 to 1956. El-Glaoui was an ally of the French protectorate in Morocco, and often hosted the increasingly powerful Europeans at the palace. The French were mightily impressed, a little too much so for el-Glaoui. They kicked him out in 1911 and promptly installed the Protectorate's resident general and some of his officers. Despite all the comings and goings, Bahia Palace remains remarkably well preserved and largely the same as it was during the time of Ahmed ben Moussa. Minus, of course, all his furniture and other removable trappings, which were thoroughly looted and have never been replaced. Visitors today will find most of the rooms empty, but this lack of furnishings doesn't detract from the splendor of the palace. Spread over 20 acres with gardens, courtyards and 150 rooms, only some of which are accessible to the public, the palace impresses thanks to its magnificent decorations. Among the finest examples of Andalusian and Moorish architecture in Morocco, the rooms for wives and concubines have carved cedar ceilings, salons are lined by stained glass windows, reception halls dazzle with their zellige tile mosaics in geometric patterns and delicate stucco works. The palace harem is decorated with woven silk panels and more stained glass windows, while the huge grand courtyard is a sight to see with its marble tiled surface stretching out between the carved wooden galleries. All this finery certainly impressed one notable visitor, the American novelist Edith Wharton, who stayed at the palace during the protectorate years. They came, they built the bahia, and it remains the loveliest and most fantastic of Moroccan palaces. Kasbah Telouet. Although most visitors to the Moroccan Sahara visit the World Heritage Site of Ait Benhadou, those looking for a Kasbah that's secluded, off the beaten path, and filled with fascinating history should look no further than Kasbah Telouet, a crumbling yet beautiful village steeped in lavishness, tradership, and the struggle for Moroccan independence. In the Mazen, the pre-1957 feudal system of Morocco, a sultan ruled the country, while a group of pashas, the equivalent of dukes, instated local control by imposing taxes and keeping order. One of the most powerful pashas of 20th century Morocco was Thami el-Glaoui, the Lord of the Atlas. The el-Glaoui family had close ties to the Sultan and had presided over Kasbah Telouet since its construction 1860, and from 1912 to 1956, Thami ruled as the Pasha of Marrakesh. Thami el-Glaoui can be easily referred to as the Great Gatsby of Morocco. The el-Glaoui family dominated the olive, saffron, and salt trades due to Kasbah Telouet's optimal placement on the caravan trails, making Thami one of Morocco's richest men. El-Glaoui wielded immense political, cultural, and economic clout and was known for throwing ostentatious parties at the Kasbah, but by the mid-20th century, el-Glaoui took his political influence one step too far. As the Moroccan independence movement was gaining popularity, el-Glaoui teamed up with the French colonialists to oust the current Sultan, Mohammed V, and place Ben Arafa, a Moroccan sympathetic to the French, in power. This served el-Glaoui well until 1955, when Mohammed V returned from exile in Madagascar and declared independence for Morocco. With Mohammed V in charge once again, el-Glaoui was declared a traitor and lost all of his political leverage, and Kasbah Telouet has been left to crumble ever since. The el-Glaoui family charges an entry fee of 10 dinar $1 to the rare visitor in order to preserve the Moorish architecture, ornate windows, painted ceilings, and narrow corridors of the Kasbah from decay. Although much of its original beauty is destroyed, the Kasbah's decrepit state has made it the perfect hidden gem for the few who venture out to experience it. Medina of Tétouan. The city of Tétouan occupies a dramatic juncture in the landscape of northern Morocco. Cascading down the northern escarpment of the Rif Mountains, it stops just short of the Mediterranean's soft, sandy beaches that are reputed as some of the best in the country. The city itself is a palimpsest of the last 800 years of migrations from northern Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, and at its labyrinthine heart is the Medina, a smaller but more faithfully preserved version of that in Fez. Like Fez, Tétouan grew up in the reign of the Marinid dynasty. Although Arab and European documents attest to a settlement here from the early 8th century, it was not until the Marinid conquest of northern Africa in the 13th and 14th centuries that Tétouan came into its own. In 1286, the Marinids built the Kasbah and the oldest mosque that still stands in the city. In the 14th century, Tétouan became a defensive strongpoint against a rebellious Ceuta, a town some 60 kilometers to the north. As the Catholic forces of the Kingdom of Castile in northern Spain began to pressurize the Islamic kingdoms of Al-Andalus, the effects were felt too in Tétouan. Thousands of refugees from the Islamic Kingdom of Granada fled their homes and settled here, on the other side of the Straits of Gibraltar. Throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, Tétouan became a hub for these refugees, who brought with them their own Andalusian traditions and customs. For true Tétouanians, the city's identity is fundamentally Andalusian. The diversity of those refugees from Al-Andalus, Jews, Morisques, Mutajars, forms the essence of a single, united identity today. The Medina testifies to this great diversity. Because of its relatively small size, a visitor can walk through 6 centuries of history in one day, from the 14th century Kasbah of Sidi al-Mandari, to the mosques of the 16th and 17th centuries, and the 20th century Jewish quarter. Each quarter bears the architectural stamps of its origin. Some of the city's most fascinating stories took place below its streets. In the 16th century, 3,000 Christian slaves spent their nights in the natural caves that run from east to west under the city. Later, in 1740–41, some 140 Spanish and Portuguese slaves were also held captive here. The altars that set up to the saints of their respective villages still exist beneath the streets of the Medina, if you know where to look. In the economic shadow of larger towns such as Tangier and Fez, and indeed trailing nearby Chefchaouen in terms of international visitors, Tetuan has instead established itself as a center of the Andalusian culture that is so key to its heritage. There is a prestigious fine arts school, Dar Sanaa, as well as a renowned annual international lute festival, the International Festival of Mediterranean Film, and many other concerts and events that occur throughout the year. Being off the tourist circuit means that Tetuan has remained mercifully free of the demands of the international tourism industry. Instead of striving to be part of this exotic tourists' Morocco, it has rather chartered its own course, and retains that sense of cultural independence today. Fez El Bali. The maze of 9,400 winding alleyways in Fez El Bali, a district in the city of Fez, Morocco, are far too narrow for cars, and too crowded for just about anything but foot traffic. This labyrinthine landscape has earned Fez El Bali the distinction of being what's believed to be the world's largest car-free urban zone. Fez also happens to be the world's largest surviving medieval city. Its streets are crowded with shops and stalls, mosques and madrasas, Islamic schools, and merchants selling dates, spices and fresh cuts of meat. Wandering the alleyways of Fez El Bali, one of the city's 3 main districts, you'll happen upon scores of leather tanneries and sites of prayer, as well as stalls selling fresh fruit and tourist gimmicks. Fez El Bali traces its history back to the Idrisid dynasty, where it served as the capital from 789 to 808 AD. To keep the superlatives coming, it's home to the world's oldest university, the University of Al-Karaouine, which you can stop by and visit, if you're able to find it, tucked in the heart of the Medina. It's easy to get lost here, as the Medina is truly huge, and it can be challenging to get your bearings and find the right signage. But that's part of the fun, you never know where you might end up. There are small homestays and bed and breakfasts hidden in the alleyways themselves. What seems like a dark, dusty corner may open up into a grand, tiled space with towering ceilings and ornate wood carvings, and of course some very sweet, freshly made mint tea. Fez El Bali was designated a World Heritage Site in 1981. One of its most distinctive icons is the Blue Gate, also known as Bab Bo Jelaud, that leads into the pedestrian-only part of the city. Wander outside of Fez El Bali and you'll find a very different side of the city, with cars and bus stations and fast food. But wander a bit further and you can walk along the crumbling walls that once encircled the entire city. Staring from above and afar into the heart of Fez El Bali, you'll see from a new angle how truly dense and colorful the ancient city is. University of Al-Karaouine. The University of Al-Karaouine, also written as Al-Karaouine and Al-Karaouine, is considered by the Guinness World Records as well as UNESCO as the oldest continuously operating, degree-granting university in the world. You'll find it tucked within the winding alleyways of Fez El Bali, Morocco, one of the world's most ancient living cities. Wandering around Al-Karaouine today, you can admire the institution's simple yet beautiful design, decorated with Andalusian art bordered with Kufic calligraphy. The university library is home to numbers of precious manuscripts including historic copies of the Quran. In the year 859, Fatima al-Fihri used her inheritance to fund the construction of a mosque for her community with an associated school, known as a madrasa. Her intention was to give back to the community that had welcomed her family. They immigrated when she was young from the Tunisian city of Kairouan, the namesake of the mosque and university. The mosque was the initial focal point, with enough room for 22,000 worshippers. It remains the largest in Africa. Both women and men can attend the university. In recent years, the female student body has grown as the culture's value of education has increased. It is a common misconception that the university only allows male students to attend. Over the centuries, the University of Al-Karaouine became a key spiritual and educational center in the Muslim world. In the beginning, the madrasa focused on religious instruction and Quran memorization but later expanded into Arabic grammar, music, Sufism, medicine, and astronomy. However, it was not until 1947 that the school was integrated into the state education system. In 1957, physics, chemistry, and foreign languages were introduced. In 1963, it joined the modern state university system, and in 1965 it was officially renamed University of Al-Karaouine rather than simply Al-Karaouine. The school's student body shrank dramatically in the early 1900s when elites began sending their children to the new Western-style institutes in Morocco. Much of the university is still highly traditional, from the student demographics to the style of instruction. Students, who range between the ages of 13 and 30, seat themselves in semicircles (halqa) around a sheikh when reading texts. They can work towards high school level diplomas or university degrees, and before they arrive at Al-Karaouine, they must have memorized the entire Quran as well as several shorter texts. Students come from different parts of Morocco and Islamic West Africa, and even Muslim Central Asia. The University of Al-Karaouine reminds us that it is not Oxford or Cambridge that first set the stage for university learning, but a mosque's madrasa that, over 1,000 years ago, set those gears in motion.